So hello, welcome to another Renegade Economist Talkshow here at Picnic 2012. I'm delighted to be joined by Tim O'Reilly, CEO of O'Reilly Media, having just given a keynote down there. Tim, let me start by saying really the cornerstone to your speech was that you've got to create more value than you take. It seems like a very fundamental thing, but we've lost sight of that as a society.
We have. It's pretty clear in the financial crisis of 2008 was driven by companies whose model was to take as much out of the system as they possibly could. There's this paper I referenced by Paul Romer and George Akerlof from 1996 called Looting, in which they described the economics by which companies would take out current value and then leave the debt to someone else. And that was seen at its worst in the financial crisis, where there was this design of financial instruments that were simply designed to extract value from the financial system without creating any. On the other extreme, you see wonderful examples, particularly lately in technology, of people who've created enormous value but didn't get very much of it for themselves. Tim Berners-Lee created the World Wide Web, put it in the public domain, setting the stage for huge fortunes. And those two extremes kind of, to me, demonstrate that value creation and value extraction are not the same thing. And it seems to me that economic policy needs to recognize that fact more clearly. When we think about value creation, far too often we think only about systems for extracting value from the economy. We say, oh yeah, we need startups that make money and so on, when in fact, many of the big industries start with people who have no idea how to extract value. It's not just things like the World Wide Web. I look at, in my own career, open source software, the new maker movement, which really just started with people having fun. But even back in the 20th century, the origins of flight, these were people who just thought, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be awesome to be able to fly? Some of them turned into entrepreneurs, but many of them were just enthusiasts. And we need an economy that recognizes the value of people doing things for love.
Does that not come down to a more philosophical point, where we've lived through a quite hyper-individual age, where the Gordon Gekko, it's almost Greco on steroids, right?
Yeah.
Greed is good. But is it not this idea that Viktor Frankl comes up with, that one has to dedicate for happiness or success to ensue? It can't be pursued. It only ensues when you dedicate yourself to a cause greater than yourself.
I think that's very true. There's no question that doing things for value, for meaning, is very, very powerful motivation. But I don't think it's really the only thing. If you are in a survival situation, you do things to survive. And there are, I think Maslow's hierarchy of values certainly comes into play. Once you've satisfied basic needs, higher kinds of things come into play, and sometimes those things are positive and sometimes they're negative. So actually, many of the people who are creating these sort of vicious extractive businesses are really not competing because they want more money. It's really for a certain kind of, it's keeping score. It's a game.
How damaging, in your view, having been in business for an awfully long time, how damaging is it for an entrepreneur to have an exit strategy?
Well, it's a pretty clear sign that somebody is not focused on really creating value with their business, that they're really trying to, get away with something. If you go in to a business with the notion that the primary thing is to get funded and then have an exit, because if you really believe in what you're doing, you'll want to keep doing it.
Do you think that we're going to see a return to the long game on entrepreneurs, especially during the kind of tight squeeze at the moment? And because, when the market isn't frothy and when that capital isn't about, do you think that enforces people back to more fundamental?
I think so. I mean, clearly in frothy times, there are a lot of people are drawn to the easy money. I heard this fascinating interview with Michael Lewis, in which he described, actually the interviewer asked him, why did all these people who you skewered in Liar's Poker then come back and talk to you later? And he said, well, it turns out that many of them got into the business after they read Liar's Poker. Here, I thought I was writing a story about, look out, here's this financial industry that's run by morons, and people read it and they said, wow, here's an easy way to make money. So he said, in fact, I'm the cause of the crisis. He said, you never know what book you've written until you understand what book people read, which I thought was a fascinating insight. The fact is, when you have a frothy time, there are people who go to exploit it. When you don't have a frothy time, that's when people do things because they really want to do them for the right reasons.
You mentioned Robert Louis Stevenson as somebody who you look to. Just talk a little bit about that.
Well, Stevenson now is mainly remembered for his juvenile novels like Kidnapped and Treasure Island. He was actually the most popular author in the world in the latter half of the 19th century, and he dedicated his life. He was consumptive. He was dying of tuberculosis, and he ended up settling in Samoa. And he dedicated the latter part of his life to trying to save the indigenous peoples of, what he actually tried to have a state created called Oceania, which would be all the island nations. And he was a wonderful spirit. He just had a sense of joy about him that I've always responded to and admired. I mentioned earlier this wonderful quote from him where he said, your greatest duty is the duty to be happy, because if you are happy, you will make the people around you happy. And it's interesting, that notion, which seems very selfish, but if you really think truly about the nature of happiness, you find that it's not actually a selfish pursuit. And I think, if you look at anybody in the history, knows the history of philosophy, knows that was Aristotle's definition of the aim of life, was happiness also. Even someone as maligned as Epicurus, who everybody says, oh my gosh, he was all about pleasure. No, he was about happiness, and he was actually quite abstemious, because he came to the conclusion that the way to be happy was not to have too much.
Well, if he saw the amount of self-storage that goes on in the world at the moment, he'd have a fit, right? Yeah. Lastly, my last question is this. At the Renegade Economist, we've learnt through making various films that the economics that we have at the moment just aren't up to scratch. We don't have an economics that actually delivers the results that we want. And this is the neoclassical economic paradigm. It hasn't been fit for purpose. So my question is this. Is it possible to upgrade economics from the outside? Can business play a positive role in upgrading the software, that is the economics, that we run the planet on?
I hope so. I think that in a lot of ways it does start with valuing, what we've traditionally dismissed as externalities, in everything from the environment to the creative economy. Understanding the value that is created, that is not captured, is really important.
That's the clothesline paradox. Can you just explain?
Yeah, this is a notion that I first encountered in a 1975 article by a guy named Steve Bayer, who is a solar energy advocate. But in particular, he's not even an advocate of things like electric solar, but simply the ecosystem services that solar provides. And he formulated this very simple notion. He said, look, if you put your clothes into an electric or gas clothes dryer, the energy you use is measured and counted. But if you put your clothes out on the clothesline, it seems to disappear from the economy. But it doesn't really disappear from the economy. In fact, solar energy makes everything, is the source of everything else, whether it's wind power or tide power or coal, oil, or stored solar energy, and yet we dismiss it because it appears to be free. And I think the economics of abundance is probably the most important economics that we need to be thinking about in the 21st century. Not because necessarily we are going to live in a world of unlimited abundance. But certainly digital goods teach us that we have to come up with a new kind of economics that's not based on artificial scarcity, because so many digital goods are not. There's no natural scarcity to them. It must be imposed. But that economics of abundance will also, I think, cause us to reconsider our approach to the physical world, because there's so much that we have taken for granted as free that is not really free.
Optimistic, pessimistic, or realistic, or a bit of all three?
I would say a bit of all three. I think that the world does always throw us curves. There's no period in history that has not had terrible things happening as well as wonderful things. And anyone who's an unlimited optimist is foolish. But anyone who is an unlimited pessimist forgets the immense resources of the human spirit to make a better world, even when circumstances would appear to dictate otherwise.
Where better to finish? Tim O'Reilly, CEO, O'Reilly Media. Thank you very much for joining us. So that's
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. That's it from Picnic this year, in fact, 2012. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.